Hey everyone, this is Ali from Boxbox. Today we have Mirco from Formula Data Analysis. Really a phenomenal content creator and page that, as a very dumb F1 fan, I really appreciate getting to look at after every race, after every qualifying. Really phenomenal stuff. Mirco, I'll let you introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank, thank you, Ali. Very kind from you. So yeah, I'm very excited to discuss some Formula One as well because, as you have seen, my content are mostly, let's say, short form, okay, and written. So to sometimes have the possibility to discuss things more, let's say, in general and orally, let's say, it's something which I really look up to. So just to present myself for those that don't know me, but that do know Box, I am Mirco Bartolozzi and I'm the founder and current only admin of the Formula Data Analysis page, which is this project dedicated to making Formula One at the same time more insightful and also more accessible to the common fan. So I'm someone who has a background in vehicle dynamics. I finished my PhD some months ago, which was on motorcycle dynamics. And while doing that, I decided that there was room to analyze Formula One telemetries to understand the sport better, but also at the same time that it was feasible for the common fan to understand these more technical aspects of the sports as long as they were explained in a straightforward and engaging way. So many people started to following my page and appreciating my content as well. So I'm here to discuss some, let's say, topics which Ali chose for me to give you a glimpse of some, let's say, behind the curtains, let's say, approaches or my opinion on some phenomenon that happened in the past few seasons, based on all the evidence which I gathered in the past few years while managing the page and writing my own code and analyzing my data. So that's it.
I think kind of starting off. Really to me, hearing about your background is super interesting. Just being kind of more of a casual F1 fan and watching through the TV. But, I'm really curious to know, like, following a race, what is the process you as a performance engineer go through to, identify what happened in the race, the data you see, and turning that into improvements to the car?
Well, let's say that this is something very similar to what you can see on my page, in the sense that even though what I show through my page, also because my time is, let's say, very limited because it's not my main job, it sort of follows the workflow of people working in teams for different series. So you have some staples in the sense that you have some analysis which you conduct every time because they are always insightful. So they are some sort of routinary analysis like the top speed analysis, which you can see very often on my page, or of course analyzing the distribution of lap time, tire degradation. These kind of things are always relevant. Okay, so you always generate this type of plot. I say plot because visualizing the data as an image is much easier than just looking at the table, of course. So you look at this visualization, and if you have, let's say, some experience, you will notice some interesting patterns, some interesting outliers, for example, or trends. And then, for example, you can also add for any specific session some more, let's say, tailored, okay, and specific analysis, something which you use to look into some phenomenon, some let's say something which happened in that session, which is not something which you necessarily analyze after every session. Just to give you an example, you have a race, okay, so after the race, there are some things which you always analyze, like in my case, the race pace analysis. So looking who was quicker on average during the race, which tires they used, and also how consistent they were. So how high was the variance in lap time? So whether a driver was able to always do the same lap time, like hammer time, let's say, or on the other hand, whether they were sometimes very slow, sometimes pretty competitive, and that's it. At the same time, during a race, there are some, let's say, highlights. Okay, for example, one engine which blows off, or an overtake, or a very slow lap. Okay, in that case, after looking at the race, you have some ideas of which things are more interesting to you. Okay, in my case, um, for example, while managing the page, it is something which is interesting for me, okay, as a fan, as an analyst, or to my followers, like some spectacular overtake or spectacular engine blow up, or something else like a specific the start from a specific driver who stalled on the let's say grid, and so on. But of course, this is also the case of people who are in that instant working, let's say, in a Formula One team. Of course, it will not depend on whether, let's say, the public, the fans will enjoy it, but instead you will still notice something related to performance, like a very slow outlap, or at the same time a deficit in top speed and so on. And so you will analyze that as well. So let's say that working in motorsport in various forms, like as a content creator, or for a team, or for example, the company which builds the vehicle, for example, a road car, which is then also used in competitions. You will both do some sort of routinary analysis, which will always give you some interesting result, and then based on those, but also based on the on what you see on the TV, for example, you will also analyze some specific aspects of some specific drivers or laps and so on. So this is my general, let's say, framework, and I have to say that it works pretty well.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. Very cool to hear. And, I guess from my fan perspective, I'm a huge Aston Martin fan. And
Okay.
like one thing that has always, like been super frustrating over the past 2 years is, start of the season, they're looking good. Started last season, Alonso was, getting a podium every week. Um, and then the in-season development where you've seen teams, get a lot stronger. McLaren last season, uh, and kind of improve off of that, data understanding. Now it's kind of, 2 straight years for Aston Martin where just the performance seems to, go in the very kind of wrong direction throughout the season. You know, from your experience, what do you think's happening there, and why does that happen? Is it getting one thing wrong and kind of going down this wrong path, or is it kind of, a more holistic kind of process?
Okay, first I have to say that I understand your feeling perfectly as a Ferrari fan. So it's more or less what I felt for many seasons. Like in one season, let's say having a so and so performance, then at the end of the season, you see the performance picking up and improving. So you have very good expectation for the following season, and then the following season is a disappointment. So it's very hard. It's not something which is specific to Aston Martin, even though I think that it is. Aston Martin is one of the teams who recently showed the biggest, let's say, swings in performance, but also some others like McLaren. If you take a much, let's say, a lengthier period from like 2010, more or less, to now, you have this sort of performance, let's say, trend. And then also for many other teams, like Mercedes currently seems unable to do some decisive steps in terms of season to season performance. In like 2022, performance was very bad because the car was very draggy. Then some things were solved, especially the drag at the end of the season. Then 2023 and 24 were as well very fluctuating in performance. So it's very hard to predict performance in Formula One. Also, I think for the teams themselves sometimes, in the sense that I expect some of them to not understand why they are losing performance, or at least this is something that you can be sure about, why some given update is not working as expected. So in the specific case of Aston Martin, I think that we with this name change, okay, we think about Aston Martin as a completely different team. But in reality, it is the old, let's say, it started from the old Force India, which then became Racing Point and then Aston Martin. So even though the name changed, the livery, and also there was a good injection of money and infrastructure as well, after all, many faces, many processes, okay, were inherited by the previous structure. So, and Racing Point and previously Force India was a team who was able to extract the most from their budget. Okay, they were, like, say, for example, the fifth best team several times. So we start with a team, Force India and Racing Point, who is able to use their limited budget very well and to have good to decent and sometimes also very good performances. So Aston Martin, their performance in 2023 was something which was, let's say, unexpected, even if we consider that Force India wasn't a bad team in its history. It was a solid midfield team. But at the same time, the year prior, so 2022, was, especially the start, very bad for such a team. Okay, so if we look at let's say the team, independent of the name, we see that they more or less moved within the same, let's say, order of performance. There was a very bad year, which was 2022, a very good year, which was 2023, the best year in the team's existence. But if we see it, let's say, if we look at the general picture, at the general picture, it's a midfield team and it's performing as expected. So the reason why, let's say, there was this big swing in performance, of course, we don't know all the, let's say, values of downforce of all the setup or development issues that they faced. But I see some trends. 2020 was the first year, I have to say, in which Racing Point was very competitive, okay, and it was the year in which they copied the Mercedes, if you remember. And at the start of that year, they were extremely competitive, also because Ferrari had the tuned engine, let's say, and many other teams like McLaren were still, let's say, not where they are now. So that was a very strong year. Then 2021 year came, and towards the end of it, they, I'm pretty sure it was, yes, 2021, they introduced that fancy rear wing, if you remember, with Vettel, which had those strange end plates. So they showed that they were able, okay, to copy another car, but still understand the concept. Because you can make a car which looks similar to another one, but the performance is due to so many variables, and these variables are so much intertwined, and each one makes such a big difference that unless you understand what you are copying, you will not have performance. So they were understanding what they were doing, and also they were able to innovate, because what they showed at the end of 2021 was something which we never seen before, okay, and it was also banned, so even afterwards. Then 2022 season started, and it was a sort of I don't know, a big restart, with teams not knowing which was the best, let's say, approach forward. So they went for a design which was very weird. Okay, if you remember, they had those very wide side pods with all the louvres, let's say, above it. And also at the beginning of the season, Mercedes was running a detuned version of the engine. Because they were fearing the reliability following the change in the mandated fuel characteristics. Okay, so they were probably worst of the worst at the very beginning, even worse than Williams, and then they improved as Mercedes was able to increase the power of the engines, and then there was the big update. I think it was in Spain, if I'm not mistaken, in which they introduced side pods which looked similar to those of the Red Bull. Okay, they were so similar that there were also some, let's say, protests for the FIA, but they were cleared. So at the end of 2022, they were quick, because in my opinion they were following the right concept, because we see now that more or less all the teams moved into that direction. Okay, so it was the design concept with the highest potential, and probably also the one who worked more easily in close to its, let's say, top end performance. But they were also able to understand what they were doing. So for 2023, they were able to build on that because they were one of the only teams, they and Red Bull specifically, who were already following the design. So they were the two teams which made the biggest step for the next year. So Red Bull dominated that season. Aston Martin started the season as the second best car, which was crazy when they started it as the 10th best the year prior. So I think that they then sort of lost themselves throughout the season with some updates which didn't bring performance at all. Probably also because the way they conceived that design had a lower performance ceiling than the version that Red Bull or others were using. So, in my opinion, it was a mix of not completely understanding their concept, uh, not understanding the potential leaks in performance from the updates that they were bringing, and at the same time the concept, their interpretation having a lower ceiling. So and we are continuing to see this year. So the car is not getting slower, it's that it's not getting as quicker as other teams like McLaren or Ferrari. So they are quicker. Okay, if they had to choose, they would race with this year's car and not last year's car. But at the same time, the others did a very significant step, also because the regulations are constant, are the same.
Hmm.
So you see year on year very significant increases in performance.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's very interesting. Like I hadn't kind of thought about how maybe, borrowing some ideas from other teams, like not understanding that concept fully could, impact that performance. I remember how kind of significant the pink Mercedes story was back when that had first happened. And obviously now a lot more money. You have Adrian Newey coming in, and all the new facilities which you kind of touched on. One of which is the new wind tunnel, and wind tunnels have always been kind of fascinating to me on how teams kind of build these massive structures to test the car, which it's insane. It's unlike any other sport I've ever followed, and you know one thing that I think a lot of people talked about last year that I find really interesting is that obviously a winning team does not get the same allocated time in the wind tunnel than a worse performing team. How, like, again, through kind of your lens as a performance engineer, when you're not getting that much kind of test data and you're kind of, I guess, shorthanded in that aspect, how much does that affect the job you're able to do in kind of improving the car?
Okay, so this is interesting. Uh, just for people who maybe don't know the rulings. Okay, now we have the budget cap, which is also something which is helping some smaller teams like Racing Point and Aston Martin to catch up. Not because they are increasing necessarily their budget, but because the budget for others is decreasing. And also we have this sliding scale for CFD and wind tunnel time. So the best the team was placed in the previous, let's say, 6 months, for example, and the less uh, time they have allocated, they can use for the CFD and the wind tunnel as well. And as Formula One performance is nowadays very correlated with aerodynamic performance, so basically improving downforce, so the force which pushes the car vertically onto the ground, allowing to brake, use traction and corner better, while at the same time trying to reduce or let's say limit the drag, so the aerodynamic resistance, which makes you slower on the straights, reduces the top speed, and also makes you burn more fuel as well. So the CFD and the tunnel time is very important for this. So the better you are placed, the less time you can use, and this is a sort of a rubber band approach, which should, I wouldn't say make everyone converge to the same level of performance, but at least reduce the differential between the very best teams and the very worst, okay, together with the budget cap. And I have to say that now in the past season, but also in the one before, considering that we we are not, let's say, very far into a ruling cycle, okay? Because on the power unit side, these power units have been with us since 2014, so a lot of time. But in terms of aerodynamics, it was a completely overhaul of the rulings, a complete, let's say, the biggest since decades. Okay, so still many teams are within 1 second one from the other, which is something unprecedented or almost unprecedented. So when you have limited time to use the CFD and wind tunnel, and aerodynamics is so paramount to performance, having less time for the CFD and for the wind tunnel is a very big constraint. Okay, but I think it's well conceived because it doesn't make you automatically slower. Okay, it's not like balance of performance in which you put 10 kilos more on one car. That car will definitely be slower. Okay, if you have less time, but you use it in the best way possible, so to make the best decisions, you will not get even 1/10 slower. Okay, so it makes engineers, let's say, smarter. Okay, and let's say also able to try to identify the best solution from the start instead of trying many of them because you don't have enough time. While instead they could be, for example, frustrated. I would definitely understand them in the case of something like the balance of performance. So, concerning the question that you were asking, it's hard to predict, but I think that when you are, let's say, the leading team, it doesn't hit you that much, okay? Especially if you, let's say, are as dominant as Red Bull was last year. But they also have the additional penalty for the catering budget onto the, let's say, the winning the world championship penalty. So their allocated time is effectively pretty limited. But if you have the best engineers and also the best managers to make the engineers work on the parts of the car, on the aspects of performance which, let's say, are most important, it shouldn't be such a big deal, okay? Because if you have some people who, let's say, are not very good at what they do, that would be a massive, let's say, hit, because they would have to test many things just to understand what's best. Okay, but if you have a very solid car from which to start, so the design concept is already established, and you have people who have a lot of experience, I think that limiting the CFD time impacts maybe the refinement. Okay, they can make, but not, I would say, most of the time, the choice, the big choice you have in front. So getting a car design concept wrong. So in my opinion, yes, this is not helping. This did not help Red Bull staying at the top. But in my opinion, the reasons for their downfall are to be looked into somewhere else, like bad management, or maybe something which we don't know about. The FIA banning something, or let's say not explicitly not changing the rules, but getting to know that Red Bull was doing something which was a gray area, saying, okay, you did this, let's say up to now, but this was a loophole and you cannot do it anymore. This is something which could have happened, but we cannot know because it was not, even if it was true, it would not be public. Or maybe just the fact that Red Bull improved less than others. For sure, many other teams like Ferrari and McLaren did a massive step year on year, okay, which helped them, let's say, leapfrog Red Bull. But at the same time, this cannot be the only reason, for the simple fact that Red Bull has brought many updates which did not work for the first time in years, I would say, and especially this consistently. So if it was a case of Red Bull, let's say, finding less and less time to be gained, they would just introduce, let's say, less parts because there were less things to be to improve, let's say, about. And also, as the CFD time is limited, you, let's say, can decide to focus on just some updates instead of changing a lot of parts. But this wasn't the case. They brought pretty significant updates, and many times Verstappen was frustrated with some behavior, or even concerning setup, there were times at which the the car was undrivable. So in my opinion, this is not about not having enough resources. Okay, this is about let's say making wrong choices with the resources that you have. I'm pretty sure about this. And then of course, when you are struggling and you understand that you are making the wrong choices and you want to recover, then at that point having less time for CFD and wind tunnel then really bites you. Okay, because you have to solve to understand what's going wrong, but you don't have the many resources that you had prior to understand what's going wrong. So this is my take. I think that Red Bull's downfall was due to wrong choices, technical choices, I mean, possibly, let's say, a bad management. Also, with all the, let's say, issues they had with the Horner at the beginning of the year, we don't know if there was an internal fight or these kind of things, which for sure don't help. Let's say also the engineer working, let's say, in the good mood, but also it's something about the other teams catching up and also the CFD. But I think that the let's say making the wrong technical choices and not understanding why immediately they were wrong was the main contributor. Then there is also the possibility about something loophole, some loophole being closed, but we cannot know that, of course.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. And I think you kind of, had touched on it a bit earlier, saying, we were in a spot where the cars were, closer than any time I could remember, kind of top to bottom. And we saw that kind of happen throughout the season last year, which was, really, really interesting. You had, you know, Alpine fighting at the front of the grid and everyone being very close, which was interesting. And now, as you also kind of mentioned, everyone's operating under the same budget cap, kind of causing that. And, in your opinion, we're getting some new, regulations in 2026, everyone kind of, now on a more even playing field. Do you think that we'll see a version of Formula One where, all 10 teams are fighting for, wins or podiums in kind of that new era?
Well, I don't see that, and I see that less than for example for 2025, because every
Mm.
time there is a massive rule change, the field spread increases. Okay, like in
Yeah.
2022, 2021 was a very close season. Okay, we had Red Bull and Mercedes, so it was the first championship who went to the last race in ages, but also throughout the field, like McLaren versus Ferrari, and then behind them, many teams in the midfield. So it was extremely close. Then 2022 arrived, and there was a massive, let's say, spread in performance, like at the first race from Ferrari, which was the quickest team, to Aston Martin, which was the worst. There was, I don't remember, but around, I think in race pace, 2.5 seconds, something like that. So a huge spread. Okay, maybe even worse than that in some parts of the race. Then the gap decreased. In 2023, everyone got closer to the best team. 2024, it was the same. We also had a very intense fight for the two championships. And if we exclude Sauber, all the other teams got closer to the best one. This is an analysis which I made about the pace in qualifying on average, the let's say the gap in qualifying in percentage throughout the season. So I don't expect 2026 to be any closer than 2025. Then with the following years, depending on the limitations and how much room the engineers have concerning the car design, how many loopholes and let's say innovative designs are conceived, whether they are closed or not, this will impact, let's say, the degree of convergence that we will see. But I have no doubts based on the concept, okay, itself, but also based on the experience that we have with the budget cap, with this sliding scale for the aerodynamics and so on, that we will see a convergence throughout the years. This is also one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of the rules changing so early. I would have loved to see, like for the engines, okay, stable rules for many years, which have brought the engines to convergence after all. There wasn't, let's say, a system like the budget cap or the CFD restrictions, everyone could spend as much money as they wanted to for how many simulations they wanted, and still we reached a very good degree of performance, because based on my analysis, Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari and all their customer teams have the same average power. Any difference is impossible to look to identify through the data, at least the data that I have access to. The only team who is a bit behind is Alpine, who is also changing the engine manufacturer, but it's a minor difference compared to the difference in aerodynamic performance that we have among the cars. So I would instead be a big fan of keeping stable rules year to year for like 8 years, 7 years, and only change things up, not to hope for some shuffling of the field, because that will happen anyway, and you will also get convergence on top of that, but instead only if there are some issues with the reliability or safety, for example. Those are the only things, the only reasons for which I would change any regulation before like 7, 8 years. This is my approach for F1, but it
Yeah,
seems that it's not the same that FIA is following, and that's fine, I have to say.
yeah, no, I definitely agree. It is disappointing that we're gonna have, I guess, another regulation shift, kind of right as the racing has gotten so great and so close. Um, but you kind of touched on saying, in your opinion, it would be better to just have that set of rules and then know you're going to be operating under that for, a long period of time.
With the 2026 rules, it's not like 2022 in which aerodynamics was completely different, okay? So a big change, but then teams could, let's say, sort of copy or understand what worked and what didn't. And then in 1 year, 2 years, we already reached a good degree of convergence. In 2026, the engine change will be massive, okay? So this will make it impossible to catch up as quickly as we did in the past 2 years, because we will start with engines which are not equal at all. I can bet on that. And catching up in engine performance is something which it takes much, much more time than with aerodynamics, because if we've seen engine power improve from 2014 to, I have to say, 2021, we probably reached the peak. So it's 7 years after. So it's a very big time span. If you start behind someone else, you will probably, if you know what you are doing, let's say, improving more year on year, but the others will improve as well. This is something which, in my opinion, happens a bit less with aerodynamics. 1 year, 2 years is enough to ace the concept, and once you ace the concept, you get very close to the well-performing teams. Instead, for the engines, there are many approaches. You don't see how the engine of the other teams is designed, so I don't expect a close field for 2026 at all.
I recently heard, Zach Brown, McLaren CEO, kind of talking about how, now that there is a budget cap, why don't we just kind of go back to, you know, letting teams kind of develop and build the car more freely with less, regulation. What's your kind of opinion on that, and how do you think that would kind of change, what F1 would look like?
Yeah, I agree with him, and I'm happy about that, because he's also a follower of the page, in case you didn't know, on
Oh,
Twitter as well.
really?
Yes, yes.
That
One of
that's
the
huge.
few,
That's
yeah,
a big one. Congrats.
one of the few F1 personalities who's been following the page. He and Verstappen, I have to say, and then some other as well. So I agree. It's not easy, because this will lead to, let's say, better, more engaging tech for those of us who are interested in the technical aspect of F1. Okay. But at the same time, it will make the field even more spread out. So forget about having like four teams like now fighting for wins. It won't happen in that case. You would have to introduce some sort of balancing, but if that balancing is like a balance of performance, then I prefer the current system 100%, because balance of performance, in my opinion, goes completely against the spirit of any sport. Okay, it's like making Usain Bolt run with heavier shoes. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. If someone is best, it should not be explicitly hurt by the rules. You can set a limit to how much you can spend, to how much time you can develop something, and then those who are best will still, let's say, rise above others, simply because they have the best processes, they have the best experience, and also you have some additional parts of the engineering process who get developed, like efficiency, like optimizing the computational efficiency of codes because you have limited time, for example. So this type of stuff is something I support. I also support making, let's say, the rules more free, but you will have less spectacular races. Okay, for something like me who loves the technical side of things, this is not a huge deal. But for many fans who want to see driver fighting, this is of course something which would hurt the sport. And I think that this is not as straightforward, because I remember that with 2022, me as well feared that the cars would look too one like the other, okay? Because we were only used to the FIA car model, okay? So we conceived that one as the only way the teams could develop a car. Then the reveal started, and we've seen completely different design, like Aston Martin with those very flat side pods. Then we had Mercedes with no side pods at all. So
Yeah.
same engine, completely different chassis and cooling arrangement. It was crazy. Ferrari with those, let's say, bathtubs with those, let's say, very strange shapes. Then, of course, this is something which reduces as teams understand, okay, this is the best approach. So no reason in being original, okay? We can just follow that approach and make it our way, but let's say reduce the amount of let's say options which are considered. But and this I would say it's a good reason for changing the rules once in a while. But I think that let's say making the regulations more free is something which is potentially better by definition, I have to say, but it's also something which has some big, let's say, drawbacks. Like even under the budget cap and even under the sliding scale for aerodynamics, you will have a more spread out field. This is something that you must accept, but it's something which would not bother me too much as a more tech focused fan as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a really interesting conversation. I mean, I tend to agree with you and say, if you want every kind of driver driving in the exact same car and having that close racing, it kind of goes against the spirit of what Formula One is.
Formula One should be something like WEC in terms of the freedom that designers have. Then WEC has other issues like the balance of performance, which is very political, okay, because teams can, or at least in the past, for example, Ford could hide their performance and then unleash the beast come race day and win because they had very, let's say, more conservative balance of performance intervention. But that's it. I would love to have cars, okay, with the same displacement, maybe even the same number of cylinders, okay, but with slightly different, I don't know, wheel bases and wheel tracks, or for example, uh, wing designs. We still do, but to a higher degree. Or for example, having an unlimited, let's say, power of the electrical engine. This is something which I would love, for example. So being able to, let's say, for example, you can limit the size of the battery, okay, and then you say, okay, you can regenerate as much energy to the battery you can under braking. You can recover all the kinetic energy that you can, okay. So this would make the sport more, let's say, technologically refined, because you would improve the, let's say, efficiency of the engines. It would make it also more eco-friendly, which is something Formula One is interested in the past few years, and also make the sport technologically more interesting. So like you can recover as much electrical energy you want to, and then also deploy it. But as the size of the battery is the same for everyone, you can use all the electrical energy at the very beginning of the straight, and then uh, you only have the internal combustion engine in the remainder of the straight, or you can do it like now with the ERS, have some electrical energy last for most of the straight. They already do this kind of changes, especially during the races, but having that to a much higher degree would be very interesting, in my opinion. And also another thing which I think should be solved definitely is the DRS. Because year after year we've been talking about, yeah, it will be scrapped because the cars would be able to follow better starting from the next year. And then even when there are some improvements, they are never enough and it cannot be scrapped. So in an ideal world, these are some ideas I would at least inquire about to try to improve the sport, or at least if
Yeah,
not the sport, the, let's say, the technical side of the sport.
yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think that it is the one thing that makes F1 so different than any of the other most popular sports in the world. Um, and, I definitely hope that they kind of, go back to leaning more into that identity and really having this battle to see who can build, kind of like the greatest car on earth. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate you, kind of, sitting down and talking with me. As someone who has like, I think legitimately one of maybe the first 5 or 10 pages I had found getting into F1, and really helping me, learn and understand it in a completely different way. It's surreal that I kind of got to, take an hour to chat F1 with you. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and also thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk with you, but also to talk with the people who follow me, or let's say downloaded the Box app on their smartphones and would like to hear me discuss about some topics. And of course, if you are watching this video, if you want, you can also add some additional questions to into the comments of the post to which it gets posted to, and I will also answer those. So it's been a very nice chat, but it's always nice talking about Formula One between very passionate people, even though we have different backgrounds. So that's it. I'm very excited for the new season, also for some, let's say, some significant changes in the lineup. First and foremost, Hamilton to Ferrari, then also Antonelli to Mercedes, and also for okay, looking at the car reveals, because it's always exciting, even though for the reasons I said before, I don't expect big revolutions the next year, as it's already the fourth year with these regulations, but instead I'm very curious about the preseason tests and trying to understand the pecking order, which is something which will, I think, leave us waiting for the truth for the first race for many, many weeks. So thank you very much.
So last thing, as a Ferrari fan, who will kind of be, let's say, the number one driver for Ferrari in terms of the points, Charles or Lewis?
In my opinion, for the first year, I'm pretty sure about this, it will be Charles. But not
Yeah, I
because
agree.
Hamilton is not a good driver, he's a 7-time world champion. So he's proved his worth more than Charles did so far, of course. Also because he drove for, let's say, with more competitive cars, but also he's a legend for the sport. But I think that Charles, at least the first year, will have a significant advantage over Lewis, because Charles has been living let's say, in Ferrari for many years. Okay, he's young still, but he started his Formula One career very early. He just did 1 year with another team, so Sauber, and then went to Ferrari. So he knows the team, he knows the engineers, the processes, and also the engineers, the coaches know him very well. Okay, understand his feedback when he uses some, let's say, technical terms, and drivers never very rarely use the exact term, especially if they are not, let's say, native speakers, they can very easily understand what exactly he means, because he's been knowing him for years. Right? For example, Hamilton will be completely new to the team, and the team will be completely new to him as well. So he will need some time to get accustomed to the box, the workings in the box, in the factory. Also, for example, even details like the buttons on the steering wheel, or all the modes, the electrical modes allowed for the let's say the deployment and the harvesting of the energy. All these kind of things is something in which he will have a deficit. And even in the best case scenario, in which Hamilton is able to learn very quickly, okay, he will still, in my opinion, suffer more in the first few races, and those, I don't know, 4-5 races in which the situation will be more critical. Also because now we have less pre-season testing than 10 years ago. They will, let's say, take a toll on the World Drivers' Championship. I don't exclude Hamilton to perform better than Charles, but as Charles is a very, very good driver, I think he's definitely a top 5 driver on the current grid, as also Hamilton is. But Charles has this big advantage. I don't expect Hamilton to match him. Then we will see for the next year, also depending on how well he ages, because in the past, after 35 years, okay, the drivers had a very steep decline. But now we've
Yeah.
had some drivers like Alonso, for example, but also Hamilton, who seem to perform well to the same degree for over a decade or even 15 years, okay? And we don't know when this will stop, because Alonso, he's still going strong, okay? And he's older than Hamilton. So maybe Hamilton still has like 3 years of very, very competitive performance. So many question marks, but I think that let's say Charles will edge him in the first year, and then Hamilton will have a good opportunity in the following year. Also because he seems to be aging very, very well, so age is not a concern. And then it will also be interesting, even more interesting in my opinion, the fight between teams. I say that I would say that Ferrari and McLaren have equal opportunities of winning the championship, be it the constructors or the drivers. And then Red Bull will have a good chance as well for the drivers' championship, even though, in my opinion, Verstappen has slightly less chance than Norris and Charles, for example, because Red Bull has finished the season on with lower performance and also on a worsening trend. Okay, so I'm not very optimistic about them. They have very good people working from them. Verstappen is an excellent, one of the top drivers that we have. So he still has a good chance. And while, for example, for the Constructor Championship, I don't expect Red Bull to fight with McLaren and Ferrari. If they do fight with Ferrari and McLaren for the constructors, then Verstappen will absolutely obliterate the opposition, because it's the team with the most, let's say, significant difference in performance between the two drivers, after all.
Yeah, yeah. I actually was thinking about this, and kind of my prediction going into it is that I do think that Red Bull might kind of recapture that, maybe not the same level of dominance, but the Constructors' Championship. And I'm curious to know, it was a bit controversial picking Liam Lawson to take that second seat. Obviously, it wasn't hard to see, the massive gap in kind of performance between Checo and Max. How do you think that Lawson's going to handle that kind of, pressure and just being thrown into the fire with, one of the greats?
Well, I have to say that based on, let's say, the history of Red Bull since they got Verstappen, I don't have high hopes of him, let's say, being close to Verstappen. Verstappen is a monster. He's completely dedicated to winning in more than any other driver, I have to say. Like, he does sim racing while not racing in F1. About F1, he only cares about the racing aspects, not the, I don't know, not the media, not the. He's like the perfect racing machine. And in my opinion, in many of the recent seasons, in some of the recent seasons, he's been the best driver on the lineup. And now I think that Red Bull has this has had also in the past few years this issue of finding a good enough driver to place alongside Verstappen. Even, for example, Ricciardo, who is, in my opinion, a very good driver, at least in his prime, suffered against a very young Verstappen. So, and that was not the Verstappen that we have now. It was a Verstappen who crashed often, made many mistakes, and probably didn't have the same outright speed as well, especially in the race, in race pace. So now we are witnessing prime Verstappen, so a four-time world champion, like for example Vettel, who was almighty during those 4 years. And so it won't be easy for Red Bull to find a good enough driver to get close to Verstappen. But I think that this is not what they are expecting. In my opinion, they are hoping for to find some drivers who, even though isn't able to do like 90% or even 80% of the points that Verstappen scores, to do at least enough points to still fight for the constructor championship as well, which is
Mm.
something that Perez was able to do in, for example, 2021. They lost it due to his retirement at the very last race, and he was also able to fend back Hamilton during the final fight in Abu Dhabi, and also in the following year, for example. But in the past year, he's performed worse than even the second driver of teams who did not win the drivers' championship like Red Bull. So, in my opinion, the change was needed simply because you could not expect Perez to improve at that point. Okay, so you really needed to try something new. So they will try him and see if he's as quick as they expect him. Okay, which doesn't mean as quick as Verstappen. And if he's not, then they will try someone else until they find someone. I see no other, unless another, let's say, sort of prodigy like Verstappen or Charles or Hamilton or Alonso comes out from the let's say the teams owned by or controlled by Red Bull. Unless this happens, they will, let's say, settle for someone who is a good, let's say, supporter for Verstappen, even though he will not be nowhere close as his performance. Like
Yeah.
Albon when he started, he did a very good, let's say start with the Red Bull. Then he declined, but at the very beginning he probably performed as well as they expect him to perform. So something like that.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff to look forward to, at the beginning of the season. And yeah, once again, thank you so much. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Um, if you're listening, definitely, if you haven't already, check out Mirco on all his pages. They'll all be linked below. Uh, and yeah, of course, always, you can also see his content on the Boxbox app. Uh, Again, hope you check that out, and really we love to kind of hear your feedback on the platform and everything. And I know we have a lot of exciting stuff coming for this upcoming season. So, you know, any questions, anything you want to reach out with, always happy to hear it.